My younger son, Leo, a pilot whose voice usually held the easy confidence of a man comfortable navigating the skies, called me, his words tumbling out in a rushed, anxious whisper. Mom, listen, something really strange is happening. My sister-in-law, Clara, she's at the house, right? I paused, leaning against the kitchen counter, the familiar weight of the old landline receiver cool against my ear. Upstairs, I could hear the distinct sound of the shower running in the master bathroom. Yes, honey, of course she is, I replied, a slight frown creasing my brow at his odd question. Clara's right upstairs. She just got in the shower a few minutes ago. Why? His voice dropped even lower, becoming urgent, almost frantic. Mom, that's impossible. Absolutely impossible. I swear to you, I have her passport right here, in my hands. Clara just boarded my flight to Paris. She's on the plane right now. At that precise, heart-stopping moment, I heard soft footsteps descending the stairs behind me. A familiar voice, Clara's voice, called out sweetly, Mom, who is it? My blood ran cold. I glanced over my shoulder and saw her standing there, halfway down the staircase, wrapped in a fluffy white bathrobe, her dark hair damp and tousled from the shower, a questioning smile on her face. The woman I knew as my daughter-in-law. This morning, just like countless others in the quiet rhythm of my retired life, had begun with the comforting normalcy of routine. I was bustling around the kitchen, efficiently doing the breakfast dishes, while the lingering aroma of coffee and toast hung pleasantly in the air. My older son, Michael, a dedicated architect perpetually immersed in blueprints and deadlines, had left for his downtown office before dawn, as usual, leaving the comfortable suburban house blessedly quiet. His son, my bright, mischievous 7-year-old grandson, Noah, that clever little rascal with his father's eyes and an insatiable curiosity, had already been picked up by the cheerful yellow school bus, his excited chatter fading down the street. And Clara, my daughter-in-law, Michael's wife of 5 years, had just gone upstairs a few minutes earlier, her soft, melodious voice floating down the hallway. Mom, she'd called out, using the affectionate term she'd adopted almost immediately after marrying Michael. I'm just going to grab a quick shower before I head out. Back down in a bit. Okay, dear. I'd called back, smiling to myself. Clara was, in my estimation, the perfect daughter-in-law. Kind, considerate, a loving mother to Noah, and always treating me with warmth and respect, making me feel welcome and valued in the home I now shared with their small family. I had barely dried the last plate and placed it carefully in the cupboard when the landline, the old-fashioned phone I insisted on keeping, much to Michael's amusement, rang its familiar, slightly jarring trill. I quickly dried my hands on the floral apron I always wore and hurried to answer, expecting perhaps a call from my sister or one of my retired teacher friends. Instead, the cheerful, youthful voice of my younger son, Leo, filled the line, instantly bringing a smile to my face. Mom, hey, just wanted to say hi. Got some unexpected downtime during a layover here at JFK. Hearing his voice felt like a warm, unexpected hug across the miles. Leo was my adventurous spirit, my pride and joy, a young, ambitious co-pilot already flying international routes for a major airline, living out the childhood dream he'd harbored since he first saw a plane soar over our backyard, a dream of conquering the vast, open skies. I settled into the kitchen chair, receiver tucked comfortably under my chin, picturing his infectious grin. I smiled and asked him the usual motherly questions about his flight schedule, the weather in New York, whether he was eating properly amidst his hectic travels. He laughed heartily, his familiar, easygoing chuckle warming my heart, and assured me everything was great, that work was demanding but exhilarating, that he was managing just fine. But then, suddenly, his light-hearted tone shifted, became hesitant, almost reluctant, as if he was unsure how to phrase something troubling. Hey, Mom, listen. Something really weird just happened. Like, really weird. My smile faded slightly. What is it, honey? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, but, well, it's about Clara. She's at the house, right? With you? I frowned, puzzled by the strange question, glancing instinctively towards the staircase where I could still clearly hear the rhythmic drumming of water hitting the shower floor in the master bathroom upstairs. "Yes, honey, of course she is," I replied, completely certain, slightly bemused. "Clara's right upstairs taking a shower as we speak. I just talked to her less than 10 minutes ago. She was wearing that old white blouse she always wears around the house on lazy mornings." "Why do you ask? Is something wrong?" How could I possibly be wrong about something so immediate, so tangible? But on the other end of the line, Leo fell silent. A long, unnerving silence stretched between us, so prolonged that I could clearly hear his sharp intake of breath, the distant, muffled announcements echoing through the airport terminal behind him. Then his voice came back, low, serious, laced with a profound, almost fearful amazement that sent a sudden chill down my spine. "Mom," he said slowly, deliberately, as if trying to force the impossible words out. That's impossible. Because I swear to you, I have her passport right here, in my hand. Clara Elizabeth Hayes. It is her, and she just got on my flight to Paris. She boarded less than an hour ago." I laughed again, a shaky, uncertain sound this time, convinced he must be mistaken, caught up in the fatigue and confusion of his demanding job. "Oh, honey, you must have seen wrong. Maybe it was someone who just looks like Clara? You know how tired you get on these long hauls. I promise you, I just saw her myself. She even told me explicitly she was going upstairs to take a shower." I tried to explain calmly, logically, attempting to reassure both him and perhaps myself against the sudden, irrational prickle of unease that had begun to crawl up my neck. But Leo didn't laugh. He didn't concede the possibility of error. He didn't offer his usual easygoing agreement. Instead, he told me, his voice slow now, measured, almost detached, as if he himself was struggling to process the bizarre sequence of events, that after all the passengers had boarded the Paris-bound flight, he'd run back towards the gate area to retrieve some flight plan papers he'd forgotten in the crew room. Near the boarding gate, lying abandoned on the floor by a discarded coffee cup, he'd accidentally found a lone passport. At first, he'd simply intended to hand it over to the gate agents or airport security, but something prompted him to open it first, just to see who the careless traveler was. And when he saw the photo, he froze. The smiling face staring back at him from the official document was, undeniably, unmistakably, Clara's. Her name was printed clearly beneath it, Clara Elizabeth Hayes. Her date of birth, her passport number, everything matched. There was absolutely no room for doubt, no possibility of mistaken identity. My heart began to beat faster now, a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs, but I desperately tried to maintain a semblance of calm, clinging to logic. "Leo, are you absolutely sure? Perhaps it's an old passport she lost? Or maybe someone else dropped it?" I offered weakly, even though a tiny, sharp thorn of genuine uneasiness, cold and piercing, had already begun to prickle deep within me. Leo sighed, a heavy, frustrated sound that conveyed his certainty more effectively than words. "Mom," he said, his voice regaining its firmness, laced now with an edge of bewilderment and something else. "Suspicion? Mom, I just went down into the passenger cabin myself, just a minute ago to check, to be absolutely sure I wasn't losing my mind. And she's there, sitting calmly, in seat 3A, first class, right next to some older guy who looks very rich, very elegant. They were talking quietly, heads bent close together, like they were a couple, Mom, intimate." Leo's final words, "like a couple," struck me like a physical blow. I stood frozen in my own kitchen, gripping the phone receiver so tightly my knuckles turned white, the familiar room suddenly seeming alien, hostile. My head spun dizzily. A couple. Impossible. Utterly impossible. I had just heard Clara's sweet voice calling down the stairs. I had just seen her familiar form, wrapped in that white bathrobe, moments ago. But right at that moment, As if summoned by the sheer impossibility of the situation, the rhythmic drumming sound of the water running in the upstairs bathroom abruptly stopped. Silence descended for a beat. Then I heard the distinct click of the bedroom door opening, followed by Clara's voice, soft, melodious, undeniably her voice, drifting down the staircase again, closer this time. "Mom? Are you still on the phone? Who is it?" Panic seized me, cold and absolute. My heart pounded so violently against my ribs I felt it might actually burst out of my chest. "Oh, just Mrs. Gable from next door, dear," I replied quickly, pitching my voice louder than necessary, desperately trying to sound normal, casual, even as my throat constricted with fear. I instinctively hurried out of the kitchen and into the adjoining living room, needing to escape Clara's direct line of sight as she peeked her head curiously around the turn in the stairs, her dark hair still soaked, droplets glistening on her shoulders. I quietly closed the living room door behind me, muffling the sounds from the rest of the house, and whispered urgently, frantically into the phone receiver, trying desperately not to let my rising panic show in my voice. Leo, listen, I just heard Clara again. She's here. She just got out of the shower." "Are you absolutely, positively sure you didn't make some kind of terrible mistake? Could it be someone using a fake passport?" On the other side of the country, an unnerving silence descended once again. Leo didn't answer immediately. And then, when he finally spoke, his voice was colder, harder, more certain than before. "Mom," he said, the words clipped, sharp. "It's impossible for me to be mistaken. I am looking at her right now, with my own eyes, on this airplane. Her face, her hair, that little mole above her lip. It is Clara. I swear it." "Which means—" His voice trailed off, leaving the terrifying implication hanging, unspoken but deafening, in the charged silence between us. Speechless, my mind reeling, unable to reconcile the two impossible realities, I slowly, numbly hung up the phone, my hand shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the receiver onto the polished hardwood floor. The cozy, familiar living room suddenly felt suffocating, claustrophobic, the cheerful morning sun streaming through the windows seeming garish, mocking. I collapsed heavily onto the sofa, the floral-patterned cushions offering no comfort, trying desperately to take a deep, calming breath, but my chest felt tight, constricted, heavy with an unanswerable, terrifying question. If Clara, my kind, loving daughter-in-law, was truly here in this house with me, then who was the woman currently sitting in first class on Leo's flight to Paris, traveling under her name, using her passport? And conversely, chillingly, if the woman on the flight was the real Clara, then who, dear God, who was the person currently moving around upstairs in my house, the imposter who looked like her, sounded like her, and had, apparently, seamlessly taken her place? A few minutes later, the woman I knew as Clara came downstairs into the kitchen, where I had numbly migrated, needing the solid feel of the counter beneath my hands. She was dressed now in a clean, simple, light blue sundress I recognized, her dark hair still damp but neatly combed, and she offered me the same sweet, slightly reserved smile she always did. "Mom," she said, her voice kind, familiar, utterly normal, as if nothing remotely strange or terrifying was happening. "I think I'll head to the market early today," beat the crowds. "Do you want me to pick you up any fresh vegetables? Maybe some of those nice heirloom tomatoes you like?" Her voice, her mannerisms, her smile, everything seemed perfectly, terrifyingly ordinary, as if the chilling phone call with Leo had been nothing more than a bizarre, stress-induced hallucination on my part. I looked at her, searching her familiar face for any sign, any flicker of deception, any hint of the monstrous imposture Leo's call implied, but there was nothing. Just the placid, unassuming countenance of the daughter-in-law I had lived with, trusted, even loved, for the past 5 years. I forced myself to smile back, a stiff, unnatural movement of my facial muscles, desperately trying to hide the whirlwind of fear and suspicion raging inside me. "Yes, dear, that would be lovely. Bring some of those nice red tomatoes, please," I managed to reply, my throat dry, constricted. The woman nodded cheerfully, picked up her familiar woven wicker market basket from its hook by the back door, gave me another brief, sweet smile, and walked out of the house, humming softly to herself. Her silhouette disappeared down the sun-dappled sidewalk towards the town center. I stood there by the kitchen window, watching her go, my hand pressed hard against my chest, trying to still the frantic pounding of my heart. A storm of conflicting thoughts raged in my soul. I didn't believe Leo, my reliable, sensible Leo, was lying to me or mistaken. My younger son had no reason whatsoever to invent such a bizarre, elaborate, and deeply disturbing story. He had always been the honest one, the sensitive one, deeply affectionate and loyal towards his family. But Clara, the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my home, the woman I had lived with peacefully, companionably, for 5 years. She was also right here, undeniably present, tangible, in the flesh, just moments ago. Unmistakable. Or was she? Could there be something I had missed? Some subtle inconsistency, some veiled secret lurking beneath the surface of our quiet domestic life, something that I, a trusting, perhaps naive, 65-year-old woman, had simply never noticed, never questioned. Had I been blind? I sank heavily into a kitchen chair, the silence of the empty house pressing in on me, amplifying my fears. The bright midday sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting intricate, shifting patterns of light and shadow on the worn, tiled floor. The old armchair in the corner, the one where I always sat to knit or read stories to Noah, seemed suddenly unfamiliar, menacing in the altered light. Leo's chilling phone call kept echoing relentlessly in my head, each remembered word like a sharp hammer blow against the fragile structure of my reality. I looked around the familiar kitchen, the heart of my home, now suddenly feeling alien, unsafe. The walls were lined with framed family photos, a cheerful gallery documenting happier, simpler times. Michael and Clara on their wedding day, looking impossibly young and hopeful. Baby Noah, swaddled in blue, his tiny face scrunched in a frown. Leo, beaming with pride, standing beside his first small airplane, wearing his newly earned pilot's uniform. All those cherished memories, captured moments of love and connection, now seemed somehow suspect, covered by a thin, distorting haze of doubt, uncertainty, and a terrifying, creeping dread. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 65 years old, a retired schoolteacher living a quiet life in a peaceful, middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. My husband, George, a kind and steady man, passed away 10 years ago after a long illness, leaving me with our 2 beloved sons, the center of my world. Michael, the oldest, is a hard-working, successful architect, always meticulously immersed in his blueprints, his models, his ambitious projects. Leo, the younger, my adventurous spirit, is my immense pride for having achieved his lifelong dream of becoming an airline pilot, soaring through the clouds, seeing the world. My simple, contented life revolves entirely around Michael's small, growing family, his lovely wife, Clara, and my adored 7-year-old grandson, Noah, and the tranquil, predictable days spent puttering in my garden, volunteering at the library, and maintaining this comfortable, memory-filled house. Clara, my daughter-in-law, had always seemed, in my admittedly biased eyes, the perfect addition to our family. Beautiful, yes, with her dark, expressive eyes and warm smile. Industrious, certainly, juggling motherhood and a part-time graphic design business with apparent ease. Always impeccably dressed, effortlessly stylish, managing the household with a quiet competence that often left me feeling slightly inadequate. I still vividly remembered the day of their wedding 5 years ago, a large, joyous celebration held in the sprawling, beautifully landscaped backyard of her parents' impressive home. Even though Clara's family wasn't ostentatiously wealthy, they possessed a certain understated elegance, a quiet confidence, and they had spared no expense to make the day absolutely perfect, a fairy tale brought to life. Clara had entered my life, moved into my home temporarily, they'd assured me, with that same confident smile, that same bright, optimistic gaze, seemingly born to be a wonderful wife to my son and a loving, devoted mother to my future grandchildren. I used to frequently think, watching her patiently playing with Noah or helping Michael review architectural plans, how incredibly fortunate I was, how blessed to have a daughter-in-law like her, kind, capable, and seamlessly integrated into the fabric of our family. But now, after Leo's terrifying phone call, after the chilling discrepancy of the passport, after the impossible duality of her presence both here and simultaneously on a plane to Paris, now, I wasn't so sure. Now, every remembered kindness, every shared laugh, every seemingly innocent gesture felt suspect, potentially part of an elaborate, unimaginable deception. After Clara, or the woman pretending to be Clara, left for the market that morning, I remained seated at the kitchen table for a long time, paralyzed by indecision and fear, unconsciously gripping the edge of the smooth, cool tablecloth. Leo's frantic call had forced me to re-examine, through a new, terrifying lens, countless small, previously insignificant details from the past few months, details that had seemed merely odd or mildly eccentric at the time, but now coalesced into a deeply disturbing pattern. There were, I now realized with a sickening lurch, undeniable inconsistencies. Days when Clara would leave the house in the morning, perhaps saying she was going to the grocery store or meeting a friend for coffee, but when she returned hours later, she seemed subtly different, off somehow. One day, she might be all sweetness and light, humming cheerfully as she baked cookies with Noah, patiently helping him sound out words as they read stories together, hugging him tightly, showering him with affection. But then, sometimes just the very next day, she would be inexplicably moody, irritable, snapping sharply at me if I accidentally forgot to put the salt shaker back in its precise spot on the shelf, yelling impatiently at Noah for some minor infraction. I had always attributed these abrupt shifts to stress, to the pressures of juggling work and motherhood, perhaps even to hormonal fluctuations, the normal ebb and flow of a busy young woman's life. But now, viewed through the chilling prism of Leo's revelation, those mood swings seemed less like natural variations and more like different personalities inhabiting the same body. My heart pounded uncomfortably as if trapped in a vice. I remembered, with a sudden jolt, an incident from a few months prior. Clara, sitting at this very table, had been meticulously writing out the grocery list with her right hand, her familiar handwriting neat, precise, almost architectural in its clarity. But then, just the following day, I had distinctly seen her jotting down a phone number on a notepad using her left hand, her script suddenly looser, more scrolled, almost hesitant, as if the pen felt awkward, unfamiliar in her grasp. Puzzled, I had asked her casually, "Clara, dear, since when do you write with your other hand? I never knew you were ambidextrous." She had laughed then, a quick, slightly flustered sound, and quickly replied, "Oh, just for fun, Mom. You know me, always trying new things. Just practicing my left-handed skills." She deftly changed the subject, and I, accepting her explanation at face value, hadn't given it another thought. But now, that seemingly insignificant detail felt like a sharp, jagged piece of a puzzle clicking ominously into place. Right-handed Clara, left-handed Clara, sweet Clara, sour Clara. Was it possible? The thought was too monstrous, too outlandish to contemplate seriously. Identical twins? An imposter? It felt like the plot of a lurid daytime soap opera, not my quiet suburban life. I was lost in this dizzying spiral of terrifying thoughts, my untouched tea growing cold beside me, when I heard the front door open and Noah burst in, home from school, his backpack bouncing haphazardly against his small back. He ran straight to me, wrapping his arms tightly around my legs, his cheerful little voice instantly grounding me, pulling me back from the brink. Grandma, guess what? My teacher, Mrs. Davis, complimented my drawing today. She said I have a real artist's eye." I forced myself to smile, ruffling his soft brown hair, trying desperately to push my own fears aside, to focus on his innocent joy. "That's wonderful, sweetie. Let Grandma see." But even as I praised his colorful drawing of a lopsided superhero, my chest felt heavy with a terrible, unspoken dread. Noah, oblivious to my internal turmoil, chattered happily as he sat down at the table and pulled out his homework notebook. "Grandma, look!" he exclaimed, pointing to a page filled with neatly formed letters. "Yesterday, Mommy helped me practice my cursive with her right hand. See? Her writing is so pretty, like yours." He flipped the page. "But today," he continued, his brow furrowing slightly in confusion, "she wrote some notes for my teacher with her left hand, and look, it came out all wobbly and kinda ugly." He pointed to the two distinct sets of handwriting on adjacent pages, one elegant and controlled, the other awkward, almost childish. I stared at the stark difference in the script, and my heart sank like a stone. It wasn't just my imagination. Noah, with his innocent, observant eyes, had seen it too. "Well, sweetie," I said, trying desperately to keep my voice light, casual, betraying none of the cold fear gripping me. Maybe Mommy was just in a hurry this morning? Or maybe her right hand was tired? Sometimes that happens. Noah considered this, then looked up at me, his innocent blue eyes suddenly clouded with a sadness that broke my heart. "Grandma," he whispered, leaning closer conspiratorially, Sometimes Mommy is weird, like really weird. Some days, like yesterday, she hugs me super tight, like she never wants to let go. But then other days, like today when I got home, she doesn't even really look at me. She just waves and keeps typing on her computer." My grandson's simple, heartbreaking words were another sharp stab, confirming the unsettling pattern, the inexplicable duality. I pulled him close, hugging him tightly, trying to absorb some of his innocent pain, trying to shield him from a truth I myself couldn't yet comprehend or articulate. He was only 7. How was he supposed to navigate this confusing, potentially terrifying reality if I, his grandmother, couldn't even figure it out? Just then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang its cheerful chime. I gently disentangled myself from Noah's embrace, took a deep breath, and walked towards the front door, my legs feeling heavy, reluctant. Standing on the porch was Helen Collins, my kind, perpetually cheerful neighbor from across the street, holding the ceramic casserole dish. Clara, or the woman I thought was Clara, had taken over to her the day before, filled with lasagna. Helen smiled her usual warm, crinkly smile, but I noticed a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even concern, in her eyes as she handed the clean dish back to me. "Eleanor, dear," she began, lowering her voice slightly, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with Clara? Your daughter-in-law is always so lovely, such a sweetheart, but yesterday when she brought over the lasagna, I couldn't help but notice, well, she handed me the heavy dish with her left hand. And I seem to recall you mentioning once that she's strongly right-handed, isn't she? Played tennis in college, you said?" Helen tilted her head, her expression puzzled. "It just struck me as odd. Or perhaps," she added quickly, clearly not wanting to offend, "perhaps she uses both hands equally well?" I forced another brittle smile, my facial muscles aching with the effort. "Oh, maybe so, Helen," I replied vaguely, desperately trying to sound unconcerned. "She's always full of surprises. Would you like to come in for a cup of tea?" She politely declined, citing errands to run, but her parting comment, delivered with genuine neighborly concern, felt like another heavy thorn lodging itself deeper into my already troubled heart. It wasn't just me hallucinating. It wasn't just Noah's childish confusion. Even the neighbors, casual observers on the periphery of our lives, had started to notice the strange inconsistencies, the unsettling differences. I closed the door, leaning back against the cool wood, feeling frozen, overwhelmed, as if the familiar, solid ground beneath my feet was dissolving into treacherous quicksand. That afternoon, needing to clear my head, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house, I went out into the small backyard garden with my watering can, seeking solace among the familiar patterns of the daisies and marigolds I had carefully tended for years. The late afternoon sun cast long, melancholic shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn, but my soul could find no peace amidst the quiet beauty. The words, Leo's frantic warning, Noah's innocent confusion, Helen's concerned observation, kept circling relentlessly in my head like trapped birds beating against the bars of a cage. Pebbles thrown into the once calm, placid lake of my life, creating ripples of doubt and fear that refused to subside. I stood there, numbly watering the thirsty plants, the cool spray misting my face, but my mind wasn't present. It was racing, desperately trying to assemble the fragmented, contradictory pieces into some coherent, understandable whole. Was I simply getting old, my mind playing tricks on me, losing its grip on reality, as perhaps Michael and even Clara sometimes subtly implied? Or had I, through sheer willful blindness, through a desperate desire to believe in the illusion of the happy, perfect family I had always dreamed of, deliberately, consistently turned a blind eye to something deeply, monstrously wrong happening right under my own roof? Just then, Clara, or her double, returned from the market, walking up the driveway, carrying her familiar woven wicker basket, humming softly. But what instantly caught my attention, sending another jolt of cold dread through me, was that she was carrying the heavy basket effortlessly with her left hand. I remembered, with absolute certainty, seeing her leave the house just hours earlier carrying the exact same basket in her right hand. I stood frozen by the rose bushes, watching her unlock the back door and disappear inside. I asked her later, trying to keep my voice casual, light, betraying none of the suspicion churning within me. "Find everything you needed at the market, dear?" She smiled her usual sweet, placid smile, unloading tomatoes, cilantro, and fresh fish onto the counter. "Yes, Mom, got everything. I thought I'd make that roasted snapper you like so much tonight. Does that sound good?" Her voice was soft, melodious, utterly familiar. Her hands, as she unwrapped the fish, moved with practiced ease, her right hand. I nodded mutely, turned away quickly, pretending to wipe down the already clean kitchen table, but my heart was pounding a heavy, terrified rhythm against my ribs. Was I imagining things? Had I misremembered which hand she used earlier? Or were these small, almost imperceptible details, the shifting dominant hand, the fluctuating moods, the discrepancies noticed by others, deliberately trying to tell me something terrifying? That evening, at the dinner table, the unsettling duality continued. The entire family. Michael, tired and preoccupied after a long day, Noah, chattering excitedly about a soccer game at school, and Clara, playing the role of attentive wife and mother, gathered for the meal. Michael was recounting a frustrating meeting with a difficult client, his voice tight with stress. Noah interrupted, eager to share his own news. Clara gently reminded Noah to wait his turn, her tone patient, loving. Everything seemed perfectly, unnervingly normal. But then, Noah accidentally dropped his glass of water, sending a cascade of liquid splashing across the tablecloth. I instinctively reached for a napkin, laughing gently. "It's okay, sweetie. Accidents happen. Just be a little more careful next time." But Clara, seated across from him, suddenly frowned, her expression hardening instantly into annoyance. "Noah, honestly, why are you always so clumsy?" she snapped, her voice sharp, cold, utterly devoid of the maternal warmth she usually displayed. "Be more careful! You've made a mess!" I was stunned into silence, staring at her, then glancing quickly at Michael. He too frowned, clearly taken aback by her harsh tone. "Clara," he said quietly, placing a calming hand on her arm. "Honey, it was just an accident. That's all. Don't upset yourself." She turned towards him then, a dangerous spark flashing in her eyes. "You always defend him, Michael. Always. And I end up looking like the bad guy, the wicked stepmother, in my own house." The atmosphere at the table instantly became heavy, thick with unspoken tension. Noah lowered his head, his small shoulders slumping, his eyes filling with tears. I quickly pulled him close, hugging him tightly, feeling a deep, aching pain resonate within me. Only a few days ago, this same woman had patiently helped him with his homework, praising his efforts. And now, she seemed like a completely different, colder, angrier person. I sat beside her through the rest of the strained, silent meal, watching her covertly, trying desperately to reconcile the conflicting images, trying to put the terrifying pieces together in my head. Today, she was irritable, sharp-tongued. The other day, she was sweet, patient. Today, she used her left hand to gesture emphatically during her brief outburst. The other day, her right hand had moved with graceful confidence as she wrote. These small, jarring differences, one layered upon another, were piling up relentlessly in my mind, forming the fragmented pieces of a puzzle whose final, monstrous image I still couldn't, or perhaps wouldn't allow myself, to fully see. I kept telling myself I had to calm down, that there must be a logical explanation. Stress, fatigue, maybe even a minor, undiagnosed medical condition affecting her mood and coordination. But every time I looked at Clara, or the woman who looked like Clara, I felt an undeniable, chilling sense of disconnect, as if I were interacting with a stranger wearing a familiar mask, as if she wasn't truly the daughter-in-law I thought I had known, lived with, even grown to love, over the past 5 challenging but seemingly peaceful years. A few days later, while taking Noah to school one morning, a task Clara usually performed but had abruptly delegated to me that day, claiming a sudden headache, he held my hand tightly as we walked down the familiar, tree-lined cobblestone street. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks, looked up at me with his wide, innocent eyes, and said, his small voice filled with a heartbreaking sadness, "Grandma, yesterday Mommy taught me how to write my name in cursive. She was so patient, Grandma, and her handwriting was so pretty, all curly and nice. But this morning," his lower lip trembled slightly, "this morning she didn't even want to look at my homework paper. She just told me to do it by myself and not bother her." I knelt down on the sidewalk, pulling him close, looking directly into his clear, troubled eyes, feeling my own heart break into 1,000 pieces. "Oh, sweetie," I murmured, stroking his soft hair, trying desperately to find words that could somehow explain the inexplicable, soothe the unsoothable. Maybe Mommy was just really busy this morning? Or maybe her headache was still bothering her? Don't be sad, okay? My voice trembled despite my efforts to sound reassuring. Noah nodded mutely, unconvinced, his small gaze still clouded with disappointment and confusion. I hugged him tightly again, feeling a surge of helpless anger. Anger at Clara for her cruelty, anger at Michael for his blindness, anger at myself for my own inaction. Noah was only 7 years old. He deserved consistency, stability, unconditional love. How was he supposed to understand, let alone navigate, this confusing, frightening emotional roller coaster if I, his grandmother, his supposed protector, couldn't even figure out the truth? That night, determined to find some explanation, however mundane, I decided to observe Clara more closely during dinner. We sat down to eat. Chicken casserole tonight, one of Michael's favorites. Everything seemed normal, relaxed. Michael recounted a mildly amusing anecdote about a difficult client. Noah chattered about his day at school. Clara listened attentively, laughed at the appropriate moments, even offered Noah a second helping of casserole, her tone warm, maternal. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Clara took a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen out of her handbag, placing them beside her plate. She started jotting down some notes, a shopping list perhaps, or reminders for the next day, writing quickly, confidently, with her left hand. Michael, who was reaching for the salt shaker at that moment, paused mid-reach and chuckled, surprised. "Hey, honey," he said lightly. "Since when did you become a lefty? Watching you write like that looks so strange." Clara stopped writing instantly, freezing for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable. Panic? Annoyance? Flashing briefly in her eyes before being quickly masked by a forced, slightly strained smile. "Oh, you know me, Michael," she replied, her voice perhaps a shade too bright, too casual. "Just experimenting, trying to activate the other side of my brain." She quickly closed the notebook, tucked it back into her bag, and deftly changed the subject, asking Michael about his upcoming business trip. Michael, seemingly satisfied with her breezy explanation, shook his head, chuckled again, and returned his attention to his meal. But I knew, with a certainty that sent another wave of cold dread washing over me, that he, too, had finally noticed something undeniably strange, something inconsistent, something fundamentally off. I remained seated there, gripping my fork, trying desperately to maintain a calm, neutral expression, forcing myself to chew and swallow the suddenly tasteless casserole. But inside, the doubts, the suspicions, the terrifying possibilities were no longer just a slow, creeping fire. They were rapidly coalescing into a raging inferno, threatening to consume everything I thought I knew about my family, my home, my life. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and the picture emerging was one of monstrous, unimaginable deception. One rainy morning the following week, needing an excuse to escape the increasingly suffocating atmosphere of the house, I took an empty spice jar, one Clara had borrowed weeks ago, claiming it was for a special chili recipe she wanted to try, and walked the familiar cobblestone street, umbrella tilted against the drizzle, towards Helen Collins's cozy, cluttered house across the way. Clara had been particularly cold and withdrawn that morning, barely acknowledging my presence, communicating only in monosyllables. The jarring shift from the previous evening's warmth was becoming unbearable. I knocked on Helen's door, and she opened it almost immediately, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron, her usual kind smile instantly warming me, despite the damp chill in the air. "Eleanor! Come in out of this miserable weather. Let me make you some fresh coffee," she insisted, bustling me inside, pulling me towards a comfortable wooden chair in her bright, cheerful kitchen. The air inside was warm, fragrant with the delicious smell of freshly baked bread. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing for the simple, uncomplicated normalcy her home represented. I handed her the empty spice jar, mumbling thanks, intending just to drop it off and leave quickly, but Helen, sensing my underlying distress, gently pulled me down to sit at her worn kitchen table. She poured 2 steaming mugs of coffee, sat opposite me, looked me directly in the eyes with that sharp but deeply affectionate gaze that missed nothing, and lowered her voice. "Eleanor," she said softly but firmly, "please don't be angry with me for asking, but has Clara's personality always been so volatile? One day, she stops me on the street, greets me so happily, asks all about my grandchildren, even compliments my pathetic petunias. But then yesterday," Helen frowned, clearly troubled, "she passed right by me on the sidewalk, didn't even acknowledge me when I waved, looked right through me as if she didn't even know who I was. It was unsettling." Helen's words, echoing my own observations, echoing Noah's confusion, were another heavy stone dropping into the already troubled lake of my heart, sending fresh waves of fear washing over me. I forced a weak smile, tried to deflect. "Oh, she must have just been preoccupied, Helen. You know how busy young mothers are these days, always rushing." But inside, I was a churning mess of anxiety and suspicion. I knew Helen wasn't just making idle conversation. She was a keenly observant woman, deeply sensitive to nuances of behavior. If even she, a relative outsider, had noticed the alarming inconsistency in Clara's demeanor, then my growing suspicions weren't just the paranoid imaginings of a lonely old woman anymore. They were grounded in a terrifying, undeniable reality. I stayed only a little while longer, sipping the now cold coffee, unable to relax, unable to engage in the usual easy banter. I thanked Helen for her concern, mumbled some excuse about needing to get back, and made my escape, my heart heavy with unspoken fears. On my way back down the street, I passed Mr. Johnson's small neighborhood bakery, the place where I always bought special pastries for Noah on Fridays. Mr. Johnson, a jovial man with flour perpetually dusting his apron, was standing at the counter, arranging croissants. When he saw me pass the window, he smiled and waved me inside. "Mrs. Vance, good morning. What can I get for the little champ today?" Forcing myself to appear normal, I asked for a couple of Noah's favorite chocolate croissants. As Mr. Johnson carefully bagged them, he suddenly asked, his brow furrowed slightly, "Say, Mrs. Vance, you're Michael's mother, right? His wife, Clara? She came in the other day. Lovely woman, so pleasant. She even told me how much Michael enjoys my sourdough bread." very kind." He paused, shaking his head slightly. "But then this morning she came back in again, looking like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders, face like a thundercloud. Bought a loaf of rye bread, didn't say thank you, didn't even make eye contact, just paid and rushed out. Seemed like a completely different person. Is something wrong with your daughter-in-law?" I froze, gripping the handle of my purse, my knuckles white. "Oh, she must have just been tired, Joe," I stammered, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts. "Long night with the little one, perhaps." I thanked him quickly for the croissants, paid, and practically fled the bakery, his innocent but damning words echoing in my ears like hammer blows. Completely different person. When I got back home, nauseous with anxiety, I bypassed the kitchen entirely and went straight upstairs to the perceived safety of my room. I made myself a cup of weak tea and sat rigidly on the edge of my bed, staring blindly at the familiar floral wallpaper. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the old window panes, carrying the faint, melancholic scent of burning leaves from someone's yard. I looked towards the quiet street, the street that led towards the town market where Clara, or her double, always walked for groceries. Suddenly, just as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, I saw her returning, walking briskly up the driveway, carrying her familiar shopping bag. But as she drew closer, my breath caught in my throat. The simple cotton blouse she was wearing today was navy blue, starkly different from the crisp white blouse she had definitely been wearing when she left the house just a few hours earlier. Trying to control the frantic pounding in my heart, I intercepted her as she entered the kitchen. "Clara, dear," I asked, striving for a soft, casual tone. Did you change your blouse? I thought you were wearing the white one this morning." She paused for only a fraction of a second, setting her bag down on the counter, then turned to me with that same bright, slightly strained smile. "Oh, yes, Mom," she replied quickly, perhaps a shade too quickly. Silly me, I spilled coffee on the white one just as I was leaving. Had to run back upstairs and change in a hurry. She offered a small, self-deprecating laugh and immediately busied herself unloading the groceries, avoiding my gaze. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept her explanation, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably now as I retreated back towards the living room. Another inconsistency, another lie, however small. The evidence was piling up, becoming undeniable, unbearable. The words of Helen Collins, of Mr. Johnson. Noah's innocent confusion, Leo's frantic warning, the shifting dominant hand, the jarring personality changes, the inexplicable changes of clothes. Everything forced me to stop ignoring the terrifying truth that was staring me in the face. That night, the fragile facade of normalcy shattered completely. We were all gathered for dinner. Michael, home early for once, Noah, chattering excitedly about a field trip, and Clara, playing her role of serene domestic goddess, serving the roasted fish she had prepared. Noah was recounting, with typical 7-year-old hyperbole, the adventures of his day. I noticed Clara nodding along, smiling vaguely, but not truly engaging, unlike her usual attentive self. When Michael, attempting to include her, asked, "So, honey, did you finish that big design project you were working on today?" Noah suddenly turned to me, his expression earnest, innocent, and utterly damning. "Grandma, oh, Grandma, Mommy didn't work on her computer today. But yesterday," he continued brightly, oblivious to the sudden frozen tension gripping the table. "Yesterday she sang me that special sleepy song, the one you always sing, Cielito Lindo. She sang it so beautifully. Grandma, just like you." I looked sharply at Clara, or the woman impersonating her. Her face had gone deathly pale. She dropped her fork with a clatter onto her plate. Michael stared at her, then at me, then back at her, confusion warring with dawning suspicion on his face. "That lullaby, Cielito Lindo, the one my own mother used to sing to me, the one I had sung to Michael and Leo when they were babies. Only Clara and I knew that song in this house. She had learned it from me, humming along quietly sometimes when I sang it to Noah at bedtime. Why would she sing it beautifully yesterday, but be cold and distant today? Why the constant, jarring shifts? I slowly got up from the table, needing to clear the plates, needing to escape the suffocating weight of the truth that was finally crashing down on me. But my mind was no longer on the mundane task. I remembered, with sickening clarity, all the times Clara had left the house inexplicably, vaguely citing errands or meeting friends, only to return hours later seeming subtly altered. One day, she'd brought home a stunning bouquet of exotic, expensive-looking fresh flowers, claiming vaguely that a grateful client had sent them. But another day, just recently, she'd flown into a rage when I'd innocently asked, "Where did you go today, dear? You were gone so long." I used to dismiss these inconsistencies as unimportant, trivial, the normal complexities of a busy life. But now, viewed together, illuminated by Leo's warning and Noah's innocent observations, they seemed like damning pieces of a much larger, much more sinister secret. A secret I could no longer bear to ignore. I didn't want to believe that Clara, the woman I had welcomed into my heart and home, was hiding something monstrous from me, from us. But every incongruous word, every contradictory gesture, every inexplicable shift in her personality now screamed that my deepest, most terrifying suspicions might actually be true. That night, long after Michael and Noah were asleep, long after Clara had retreated into the master bedroom with a curt, dismissive "good night," I sat alone at the dark dining room table, the sight of so many happy family meals now feeling like a courtroom. I took out my old, worn notebook from its hiding place. My hand shaking almost uncontrollably, I wrote the first terrifying line of a truth I could no longer deny. Clara leaves for errands, returns as someone else, basket color change, blouse change. Hand dominance shifts, mood swings, extreme. Sings Cielito Lindo one day, cold the next. Neighbors notice. Noah notices. I didn't know yet what monstrous game was being played, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't keep pretending, keep hoping, keep silently acquiescing. I had to keep digging. I had to keep writing, keep documenting. I had to find the courage to uncover the full, terrible truth, for Michael's sake, for Noah's sake, and perhaps, most importantly, for my own. My quiet, orderly world had been invaded by chaos and deception, and the only way out, I now realized, was to confront it head-on, however terrifying that prospect might be. The time for silent observation was over. The time for action had arrived.